Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villere's Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villere's provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villere's Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969.
Dave Miette Insurance Agency, 504-556-0809 or davemietteINSagency.com.
C&C Drugs is a family-owned pharmacy that's been serving Southeast Louisiana for over 50 years. Whether you need help taking care of an elderly family member, a growing child, or even a pet, C&C provides patient-centered care for your entire family. C&C Drugs, large enough to serve you, small enough to know you. Locations in Mandeville and Araby.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports, live from our state-of-the-art Pontchartrain Production Studios. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we'll talk a lot of New Orleans Saints. Hope to get into a little bit of Pelicans. We'll also talk about the future of NBA and also professional baseball, as well as college football and professional football, what's going to happen again with the pandemic, the possibility of reopening and having games again. And to break it down for us, an award-winning journalist, one of our really good guests, one guy I love to have on the radio and TV show. It's Les East of CrescentCitySports.com and so much more. Les, welcome to the show, as always. Thanks so much for coming down.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate you having me.
Always good. And before we get started, tell us a little bit about some of the things you're involved in. Has it been curtailed down with the pandemic?
Yeah, it's been a little bit slower,
right.
But fortunately, at CrescentCitySports.com, things have not slowed one bit. So we have been providing as much quality content as we normally would. It's been a little bit easier here of late, thanks to NFL free agency.
Thank you.
And the NFL draft, a lot of Saint stuff, but we've also done some historical stuff, some high school stuff, and we'll continue to do that for as long as it takes, so you know the readers don't miss a beat.
Well, again, it's my go-to site. I love the writers that are there. I'm biased. Again, I have these guys on my shows all the time, but you're talking about a who's who of writers in this city and in this state, and you guys do a fantastic job.
Thanks.
Fantastic.
It's a little uncomfortable here. I was expecting Renee Nadeau or Jude Young to be next to me.
It's been very different. Now, again, you know, the alternative would be obviously using Zoom or Skype or one of these other deals, and we've discussed it, you know, as a show. You know, Will, myself, you know, the powers that be here, but I wanted to be able to try to have some sense of normalcy for the audience. And I love the round table where we have multiple people here, but I figured at least for right now, what we'll do is, you know, we'll just continue to go with at least one guest, you know, try to get someone as knowledgeable as you are, and then we'll go from there. Because again, so much has changed over the last 6 weeks or so. At least they know they can tune into this show. And you know, we're practicing social distancing. You know, you got checked before you came in. No, you really didn't. But you know, again, we're just trying to at least bring something, a little respite to people. You know, to be able to talk a little sports and get them again back into you know, not have to deal with their daily lives, especially with everything that's been going on over the last 6 to 7 weeks.
I think that's the right decision, and I think it's on a very small scale a model for what everybody should be doing, which is maintain what normalcy you can within common sense guidelines.
Yes, and that's what. And look, again, not to get too much off on a tangent on because we've done this on the show for the last few weeks. You know, we're in a different situation now. So we're going to have to adjust as Americans and people around the world to what's going on right now. Eventually we'll get back to a true sense of normalcy, but whatever that sense of normalcy is going to be, we're just going to have to be flexible enough to be able to adjust to it.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's just the way it is. But yes, it was something we really discussed and we thought about it long and hard, but we felt like, hey, look, let's try to at least bring a sense of normalcy to the audience that checks out this show on a weekly basis. Glad you're here. Let's start off with the Saints draft. We'll get into the specifics of the draft, but just overall, the way the Saints approached the draft, because they pretty much told us what they were going to do, right? They're very, very targeted. This year, more than ever, I think, they looked at the situation and said, okay, we don't get to see the players up close and personal like we did before. There may be some medical issues down the line with players that, again, we're not going to be able to have our doctors there. There were some that most colleges didn't have pro days, so you couldn't go to the pro days. So you had to rely on relationships and ultimately, again, your scouts, and then really had to be very, very targeted in terms of the players that you wanted. That seemed to be the Saints' MO all the time, but even more this year. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It was very much a Saints draft. They had a clear vision, to use a Sean Payton term, of what they wanted to do, and they went out and executed it as best they could with the assets they had. They weren't coy about what they wanted to do. Linebacker was one of the major things. They didn't feel that was the best value in the first round, probably disappointed some LSU fans. But they saw great value in the third round, traded up to get Zach Bond. As you mentioned, a lot of ties to that Wisconsin coaching staff. So even though he had a diluted drug test at the combine, that was something that obviously didn't scare them off, and I think that's because of the contacts they had on that staff. And they went up and got the tight end, which was important because they couldn't get the wide receiver that they wanted, but they did get a pass catcher. As always, when they found a player that they wanted, they weren't afraid to trade up and get them. They did that twice. They even talked about trading down, which is not normally their MO, but that didn't work out. So I think it was sensible what they did. I don't think they overpaid really in any of the trades that they made. So it was very much a typical Saints draft, and I think one you would have to nitpick to find any real criticism of.
I would agree with that. I have one criticism. We'll get into it a little bit later on. But again, it's not a criticism that you would say, oh man, it's the end of the world. But I mean, a little critical. Cesar Ruiz, the center guard out of Michigan, highest graded player on their board, and a guy that they said graded out 99% accurate on his calls. That Patrick Queen was there. A lot of people, again, pushing for Patrick Queen, not knowing the Saints had already had their eyes on Zach Bond. But with that said, your thoughts on passing on Queen, picking Ruiz, and ultimately, again, what he will bring to the table for this team.
Yeah, I wouldn't have criticized them if they'd taken Patrick Queen. In fact, as the draft sort of unfolded, I was thinking he would be certainly in their bullpen.
Me too.
And I'm sure he was. But they decided that Ruiz was the better pick, and I understand why. The interior of the offensive line is extremely important for Drew Brees. Larry Woolford did not have a great year last year. They have flexibility there with Eric McCoy and with Ruiz now, either of whom could move to guard, one of whom will.
Yes.
And they don't have a lot of depth on the offensive line. Andrus Peat and Teron Armstead have had a history of injuries, so they've had to count on that depth quite a bit. So I think for all of those reasons it factored in, plus Ruiz is a very solid citizen by all accounts, very smart player. And I just think it was a good fit. Patrick Queen would have been okay, but this guy is probably going to start as a rookie. I don't know that Patrick Queen was going to be a starting linebacker as a rookie. So I wouldn't have criticized either pick, but I understand completely why they did what they did.
Yeah. Where do you think he plays? There's been speculation that McCoy will move to the guard position, and Ruiz will be the center. McCoy graded out as one of the best centers in the NFL last year as a rookie. What do you think happens there? I mean, it's a good problem to have, but how do you think that plays out?
I'm not sure they know at this point because they haven't even had Ruiz in
yet.
Right, sure. They'd be doing rookie minicamp probably next weekend if things were normal. So I think that's something that can evolve over time once they see him on the field, get him into meetings. But if I had to guess, I would say that McCoy makes the move, One, it's easier for a second-year player to change positions than a first-year player, even though Ruiz played some guard in college. He was a center for the last part of his career. And I just think the Michigan people have spoken so highly about his intellect and his ability to make the calls on the offensive line that it looks like he's up to that at least as well as McCoy was last year, and I think the transition might be a little bit easier for McCoy. But I still think it's possible once they get into training camp, assuming we have one, and they're able to look at both guys in both positions, that's going to kind of dictate it, and they may even surprise the coaching staff with how it plays out.
Do you think Larry Woolford at this point will be allowed to come back and to compete for the position against either McCoy or Ruiz? $12.8 million cap against the cap this year. If they were to cut him, they would save $8 million against the cap. The $4 million of dead money, they can spread that over 2 seasons, so it's about $2 million in dead money. He is a quote-unquote Pro Bowl guard. He's only 28 years old, so he's still young enough. I got to believe that there had to be at least an effort to try to trade him during the draft, but there were probably no takers based on, again, what the Saints had done in the first round, knowing that eventually they probably will have to, again, maybe trade him or cut him. What do you think happens with him there? Now, look, let's say he comes into camp shape, ready to go, and that's a battle. Now, one of the first things Peyton said was Reeves wasn't drafted to sit, but Larry Woolford could have something to say about that.
Yeah, and I was surprised by that on the conference call. When he just came out and said we didn't pick a guy this high to come in and be a backup.
Motivating for Woolford, you think?
I think that's part of it.
Right.
But I think part of it is also a genuine appreciation for what they have in Ruiz. I'm sure they must have been on the phones talking about possibly trading Woolford to get another pick or two at some point in the draft. But like you said, they weren't really holding many cards there. Their price is going to probably come down. They might even have to release him at some point, depending on how things play out. But I don't think they're going to be in a hurry to make a move there. Like I said before, depth has not been great on the line. They have a history of injuries there. You can't have too many offensive linemen that you can count on, and they can count on him. So I could easily see this going to training camp with Woolford competing with whichever one of the young players moves over to guard, and then let it play out. Some team may get an injury in the preseason, and they can make a trade and get better value there.
True.
Maybe one of the young players isn't better than Woolford, depending on how he shows up.
Or an injury happens within training camp with the Saints.
Absolutely. So I think they will take that into training camp, let them compete, and they can make a more educated decision at some point, and probably in late August.
Right. Now the Saints had a late first round grade on Zach Bond out of Wisconsin. Again, they found a trading partner in Cleveland. They moved up from 88 to 74. They gave up their 2021 third round pick. Now this is a compensatory pick coming back to the Saints in the third round for Teddy Bridgewater. So ultimately, again, they're not in a situation where they lose their third round pick. They lose their third round pick, but they will have a third round pick next year. He had Liz Frank surgery early in his career. You mentioned the diluted sample. Again, we talk about the Saints with relationships. The Peyton Loomis, Ireland, the scouts relationships, and you and I discussed this the other day. You look at the Wisconsin coaching staff. Jim Leonard, the safety, former NFL safety, played with the Saints. He was here for the preseason a few years back, and of course they end up letting him go as a courtesy as a veteran, so that he could hook on with another team, because he was going to be nothing more than maybe a backup here in New Orleans. He's the defensive coordinator at Wisconsin. A name everybody knows here in New Orleans, Bobby April III, Bobby April's son, is the linebacker coach at Wisconsin. So again, when you talk about a pipeline into Wisconsin and knowing exactly what's going on in that defense, they have a book on Zach Bond, and obviously they had targeted him from day one, even to try to get back into the first round, second round. Ultimately, they were able to get back into the third round to be able to pick him, or move up into the third round to pick him up. Talk a bit about that pick and the relationships as well on, again, how they got the information on Bond.
Yeah, well, those relationships are really important, and Sean Payton and his staff over the years have expanded the relationships they already had when Sean came here as a young head coach. And they use him just like other teams do. It's a smart thing to do because you can, if you have good relationships with coaches on the staff, you know or you trust that you're going to get the best information you can get about guys. And this year being different, you weren't able to bring guys in and meet with them. There weren't pro days like you mentioned earlier. So you didn't have as much information that you can't get on film that you would have had in past years. So I think that was extremely important here. He did have the foot injury in 2017, cost him the whole season, I believe. And there was speculation that was one of the reasons he dropped. And he was asked about that on the conference call on Friday night, I guess it was, and he didn't understand it because he basically started and played every game for 2 years after that. Last year, I think he had 12 and a half sacks. So why that would have been an issue, I don't know, unless something showed up at the combine that I haven't heard about. But I think those contacts definitely helped. I think that was a deal where they started looking early in the evening to try and get into a position to get him, but they weren't going to overpay. And so they had to wait and wait and wait for the opportunity to get the cost for moving up to match their desire to get him. And ultimately it was about 14 picks ahead of where they were going to be anyway. And it worked out. I think it was a good move, and certainly those contacts in Wisconsin helped.
He is a rush linebacker that can rush the passer, but he's also a guy that can cover the back or the tight end coming out the backfield. His ability to play the mic, which is one of the things they talked about maybe down the line, him playing, to me seems kind of far-fetched, at least early. Again, he's not a great linebacker against the run, but again, he is a guy that could start off at the strong side linebacker, and a guy that they can utilize, as Dennis Allen often does with players, again, a specialization for what they want him to be or do on the field.
And he's a guy who's important in a lot of ways, which you just touched on. The versatility is very important, and we talked about the injuries they've had on the offensive line over the years. Alex Anzalone's played, I believe, fewer than half of the games he could have played in 3 seasons because of injuries. Promising young player, but a history of injuries going back to Florida. Kiko Alonso, I believe, is coming off his 3rd ACL surgery, going back to college. So there's a good possibility that you're going to have to count on your depth at linebacker even more than you would normally. Like the offensive line, that's one of the thinner positions on the team going into the draft. So it makes sense for all of those reasons. I think his ability as a pass rusher will be most important early on. But if Anzalone were to get hurt again, hopefully he won't, then that versatility could come into play at some point during the season. But I think a situational pass rusher is probably will be the first thing he does. And he'll be, I'm sure, on special teams to some degree.
Yeah, I would agree. Again, that we've talked about it. Peyton talks about it all the time, a vision for the player. And you can visualize this guy, again, ultimately rushing the passer from different gaps. Okay, not just, again, a guy that's going to be an outside pass rusher, but a guy that, again, you can utilize maybe in that NASCAR package where, again, they're trying to get their speed rushers on there, and he's doing it from the linebacker position where they can bring him. A lot of times they're using the safety in that capacity now, but maybe now using the linebacker to do that as well. We saw Anzalone do that a little bit. We've seen Craig Robinson do that a little bit. Even Demario Davis at times.
Yeah, and Davis's primary strength has been as a tackler from sideline to sideline, led the team with tackles both years. But he's also, last year especially, I think, got more involved as a pass rusher and had some sacks. But, if Marcus Davenport is able to stay healthy, yet another player who's had some injury issues, with him and Cam Jordan on the outside rushing the passer, if you're able to utilize those guys over the course of the season, then you have this kid who can move in between and, like you mentioned, rush from different positions. And I think it just adds a lot of confusion for the offensive blocking schemes in pass rushing packages. So I think he could definitely have an impact as a rookie.
I do too.
And possibly be a starter down the road, and maybe not too far down the road.
Yeah, I'm with you. Especially, again, as you mentioned, the injuries that we've seen from Anzalone and Alonso. And if they come back healthy, hey, that's Lanyap at that point, okay? As far as, again, having healthy linebackers. Plus, again, as you and I have discussed on both the radio show and this show, Saints don't normally play 3 linebackers. They're a 2 linebacker, 1 linebacker. You utilize, the speed in the secondary in a lot of cases on the defensive side of the ball. But again, this gives you another weapon. And if you're a Saints fan and you were upset about the Saints passing on Patrick Queen, you feel much better now because they got the athletic linebacker that they were lacking.
Yeah, that was very important. And in fact, one of the last things Sean Payton said on the conference call after the first round on Thursday night is he said, we have to address linebacker in some shape, form, fashion, whatever the term was. And he said, we would prefer that to be in the draft, but if not, we always have free agency to fall back on. But that was definitely what they wanted to do Wednesday, and I think this is, in the third round, I think this is definitely the guy they wanted, and they were able to get him, and I don't think they had to overpay to get him, so I think it worked out. If you had asked Sean Payton when he signed off on Thursday night what he would like to most do the next night, I think he would have said get Zach Bond at a reasonable price, and they did that.
I agree 100%, and they were able to do that, absolutely. And again, remember, the third-round pick they were able to utilize to be able to move up. They have a compensatory pick coming back next year, so they will have a third-round pick.
Right.
Matter of fact, as of right now, they have their full complement of draft choices for next year, which we have not seen for a long time. Doesn't mean they're going to hold on to them.
Do they have the 6?
I think they do. I'm not positive.
Because of Tommy Stevens.
Well, that's right. But no, that's right. They got a 7th back. No, they get a compensatory 6th-round pick back.
Okay.
They do. They get that for Eli Apple. So they do have. They get a 6. That was the reason why they held out so long to sign Jameis Winston, because they wanted those compensatory picks to come back. So they get a 6th-round pick for Eli Apple. They get a 3rd-round pick for Teddy Bridgewater. So they have a 6th-round pick. They have their full complement of draft choices.
Well, then I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say that in next year's draft they will definitely trade up at some point with all those picks to work with.
Well, I tell you that Les he goes out on a limb a lot, doesn't he? Yes, he does. Let's talk about the 3rd pick. And this is moving up in the 3rd round. Again, Adam Troutman, the tight end out of Dayton, big, athletic, can catch the football. What I was surprised is that Peyton mentioned to you guys in the conference call, he is also a very good inline blocker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he said they had him rated as perhaps the top blocking tight end in the draft, and that's a bonus. I think.
If he can catch it, and as big as he is,
yeah.
6'5", again, a big target for Breeze, which he likes.
Yeah.
I'm not going to call him a Jimmy Graham clone, but they look at him as a pass, as you mentioned, a pass catcher, but it's a pass catcher obviously that can block.
Right, and he was, like Jimmy Graham, a basketball player in high school, and he was a quarterback in high school.
As was Zach Bond, right?
I'm not sure about Bond.
I think I thought he was a quarterback in high school as well.
He may have been.
Okay.
But he, so very athletic. Like I mentioned before, it mitigates not being able to get a wide receiver in the draft because you have another pass catcher. And the way the Saints use running backs and tight ends, it doesn't matter.
It's interchangeable.
It doesn't really matter what they're listed at on the roster. So I think that was significant. Another thing is, I think he probably was devalued by some teams because he didn't play at a very high level. He played in the FCS. And the Saints have a very good track record since Sean Payton's been there of picking really good players who have been overlooked because they played at small programs with Marcus Colston, Jari Evans, and Jermon Bushrod. And to a lesser degree, you could even throw Teron Armstead in there, even though it was an FBS program. It was a smaller FBS program. So they seem to have a pretty good eye for who can translate to the NFL, even though they're coming from a smaller school. And they saw that in Marcus Davenport, too, who was, Texas San Antonio, a relatively small FBS school. So you have to give them the benefit of the doubt on anybody coming from a smaller program. And I just think it makes a lot of sense because Jared Cook is not real young, did a nice job last year when he was healthy.
Yes.
But they do like to use multiple tight ends. Josh Hill is a very valuable player. but not that much as a pass receiver.
True.
So having a second pass receiving tight end to go with Cook, and then still having Josh Hill to do all the things he does, I think, again, gives them a lot of versatility.
And if you remember when Josh Hill went out last year and was injured, Peyton admitted that, again, a lot of the plays really start with the tight end and with Josh Hill in his skill set. And a similar skill set here because of Hill's ability to block. He can catch the football, but is not really known as a pass receiving tight end. But I think that is an underrated part of his game. You're bringing in a guy now can block, who we know can catch the football as well. The only criticism I have is giving up the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks. I think we said this last week on the radio show. We said it again on the program, on the TV show last week, and I know you've discussed it as well. The Saints don't have a lot of open roster spots. So again, drafting a lot of players in a lot of cases would be like it was a couple years ago, where you let all those players go and they were picked up by every other NFL team, and a lot of those guys were able to stick on those teams. They didn't come out as starters, but they were special teams players, or they were guys that played a role on other teams. When you look at the depth of this draft at wide receiver, at cornerback, to me, you might have been able to find that pass catcher in the 4th round, or again, that cornerback in the 5th round that could have come in. Even an offensive lineman, they talked about, again, they still don't have that swing guy, with the exception of Andres Pete, that can swing from guard to tackle. They have a lot of guys that can swing from guard to center, but not a lot of guys that can swing from guard to tackle. The only criticism I have is, and I think that if you're a Saints fan, you'll pay attention to what Minnesota does with those draft picks, or again, those players that were drafted around that time, to see again how many maybe emerge as very good to maybe great players in the NFL, or at least starters. With that said, the points worked in the Saints' favor. Minnesota made the trade, even though, again, the points didn't match up. The Saints won the trade in terms of points. My only criticism would be, wow, in a draft that's deep, in positions of need, you walked away from it for a small school tight end that we don't know yet can play in the NFL.
Well, that's the biggest key. There are a couple of points, and I agree with everything you said, but the point system grades out well for them.
Yes.
The thing that the point system doesn't do is it doesn't factor in the value of the individual to the team making the pick after the trade. So if the Saints felt like they were getting a steal with this guy at that spot, then they then he's worth more than whatever the points value is in a vacuum.
True.
Okay, because they got the guy they wanted. And I think Mickey Loomis even said they were willing to pay more if they had to, within reason, to make that deal. So, but like everything else in any draft, all we're doing now is trying to judge what they did with the assets they had.
True.
If they're right about these guys, it was a good draft.
Right.
If they're wrong about these guys, or at least one of the higher picks, then it was a bad draft.
True.
And we won't know that for a few years. So I don't criticize that because, like you mentioned, 4th, 5th, 6th round picks are going to have a hard time making this roster. Of course, that works against Tommy Stevens, but his circumstances are a little different because of his versatility.
It's a unique play, unique skill set.
So I don't have a problem with that. The reason I'm giving them the benefit of the small doubt that you provided is just that they have a good track record of getting guys from small schools who can handle the transition. They seem to know tight ends pretty well.
Yes.
And it was not only a position of need, but it also mitigated not getting a wide receiver. The thing about wide receivers is they had, that was certainly on their radar in the first round.
Yes.
But I believe 5 of them went off before they got to pick.
Right.
So they said, well, we're going to take the number 1 interior offensive lineman instead of the 6th wide receiver.
Right.
By the time they picked again, I think 14 had come off the board.
True. Right.
So you're already down to the 15th pick. If you keep your 5th round pick, it may have been the 25th, 27th wide receiver. I don't know exactly how it works out. So it just didn't line up right for them to address the wide receiver position the way they wanted to. The tight end mitigated that to some degree. DB could have been helpful, but they have a lot of depth in the secondary,
Right.
and they have several defensive backs who are almost guaranteed roster spots because of special teams.
Yes.
So there's not a lot of openings there for a rookie in the 4th, 5th, or 6th round to come in and try and make it in the secondary. So, again, I understand why they did the things they did, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. And 2 or 3 years from now, we can look at this, and it may look totally different.
Right. Well,
to
I mean,
us.
again, it comes down to this. These guys come in, they work out, it's not a big deal. There's injuries, and then all of a sudden you have an empty draft that ends up affecting you years down the road. We saw that before Jeff Ireland got here, the empty drafts that led to 7 and 9 seasons. And again, don't kid yourself. That's what led to the 7-9 season. Empty drafts, not being able. You get a Super Bowl team. Teams are picking off your top players. They're leaving for more money, free agency, and you're not able to augment that with draft choices. Instead, you had more undrafted free agents making the team back then than you had draft picks, and that was the issue until Ireland got here. But that's why you give them the benefit of the doubt, because Ireland has done so well in the draft. Let's take Tommy Stevens, and then we're going to take a break. They traded back into the 7th round. To be able to pick up Tommy Stevens. They gave up their 6th round pick next year, as mentioned. They get a compensatory pick back, so they have a 6th round pick. Tommy Stevens is a Taysom Hill clone. He actually started his career at Penn State, for those that don't know. Joe Brady was at Penn State during that time.
Joe Moorhead.
Right, and Moorhead. Joe Brady as well.
Right, okay.
Okay, Joe Brady actually developed the package for, the Taysom Hill package was developed for Tommy Stevens at Penn State. So when Brady leaves Penn State and whatever, and he ends up back in New Orleans, they utilize that package with Taysom Hill. Meanwhile, Joe Moorhead moves on to Mississippi State. As a graduate transfer, Tommy Stevens goes to Mississippi State to follow Joe Moorhead. So again, when you talk about the origins of the package, the Taysom Hill package, it was Tommy Stevens and Joe Brady at Penn State. Now, the backstory from Jeff Duncan today at The Athletic was that it was Carolina that already was making a deal to be able to have Tommy Stevens to come in to play under his old coach Joe Brady to, again, install that Taysom Hill package at Carolina. Peyton saw that. He ends up trading back into the draft. He picks Tommy Stevens because, again, at that point, he becomes the property of the Saints, and you don't have to overpay for him as an undrafted free agent. So, again, that's the backstory there. The question is, now, I don't think he's a quarterback. I think he's the backup slash player. I think he's a guy also that Taysom Hill gets hurt, you can utilize him in that position. I think down the line, depending on the future of Taysom Hill, I think he's the slash guy on this team. Give us your thoughts on the pick. Give your thoughts on what you think the future of Tommy Stevens is here in New Orleans.
Well, first of all, that'll teach Joe Brady to leave Sean Payton to go to LSU.
Amen.
But, yeah, it's very intriguing, and it could all play out in the sense that, he not only learns, or he already knows the package from Penn State, and he gets a chance to practice it behind Taysom Hill and learn from Taysom Hill. And then if, as the Saints seem to think, Taysom Hill eventually succeeds Drew Brees, then Stevens slides right in, and you have a similar situation there. The tricky part, I think, for this year is, can he play another position like Taysom Hill does? Right. Because you're carrying 4 quarterbacks.
Right.
Or you have to put him on the practice squad and risk losing him probably to Carolina.
Or you will lose him to Carolina.
Right. So I don't know that that's even a viable option.
Right. He's on the roster if ultimately you're going to keep him.
So you're talking about carrying 4 quarterbacks.
Right.
So he has to be able to do something on Sunday.
Right.
And if Taysom Hill is in the same role he had last year, then he has to be able to play wide receiver. He has to be really good on special teams. He has to be able to do something, I think, on Sunday. So the tricky part is, again, having the vision that makes him worthwhile on Sundays as a rookie. It makes a lot of sense, I think, long term.
Yeah.
But that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, he could be inactive on Sundays if they don't have a specific role for him. So I'm not sure exactly how it's going to play out, but I think he's going to be on the roster. And he's going to be a guy to keep an eye on over time because, like Taysom Hill, he has a lot of value.
I would agree with you, and I'll end with this as we go to break. If Tommy Stevens makes the team, and we think he will because, again, the investment they've made in him, There's a possibility that they may take Taysom Hill off a lot of the special teams coverage units, and maybe that's where he finds a niche going forward if ultimately he can do that. I don't think he was brought here to play quarterback. I don't think that's in his future. I think his future is a slash position, and that's why they brought him in. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guest tonight, Les East, award-winning journalist from CrescentCitySports.com. We'll hear from our underwriters. We'll be right back. We'll talk Taysom Hill, Jameis Winston, and of course your phone calls a little bit later on in the program. I'm Eric Asher. Stick around.
Refrigeration has been family owned and operated since 1989. Burkhardt has energy efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhardt's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhardt's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhardt's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Experiencing rough weather with a bad roof can be a nightmare. It doesn't have to be.
Suburban Roofing, because when it comes to roofing, there is a difference.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. Special thanks to all of our underwriters. If you love this show, please consider to support our underwriters. Tonight, Les East joins us on the program from CrescentCitySports.com. I'm your host, Eric Asher. We now turn our attention to the quarterback position with the New Orleans Saints and the new contract that Taysom Hill got, and we'll follow up. We'll talk a little about Jameis Winston, the newest addition to the New Orleans Saints. First of all, Taysom Hill signs a 2-year, $21 million contract. $16 million of that is guaranteed. There's $1 million in incentives. It makes him the highest paid backup quarterback in the league. Wow, you go from almost nothing to a first-round tender of $4.6 million to again now $16 million guaranteed over the next 2 years. I asked this question first: is that more about his ability to be slash, or to maybe be the heir apparent?
Well, that's a good question, and it surprised me how big that number was when they did sign him. But it tells me, I think probably both of those things factor into it, but it tells me a little more about the quarterback thing. And I've always been a little bit skeptical about him being the heir apparent.
As have I.
I will say that last season he showed a more dramatic leap as a quarterback than he had previously. And so I can see what Sean Payton sees in him. And so, but I was still skeptical as to whether he would actually be the successor. But this financial commitment leads me to believe that they may be more farther along in being set on that for the future, whereas before I think it might have been, I was thinking it was sort of an idle thought that, he could be actually the successor. Now I think it's more of a reality, but he does have a lot of value in all those other roles. So I think it's a little bit of both, but it jumps out at me more as the potential successor to Brees.
Payton said that he has earned the right to compete for the starting job, when Brees retires. A lot of people don't go with the entire quote, saying that again, that it hasn't been handed to him. At this point, he's going to compete for it. Look, there's a roll of the dice here when you talk about Taysom Hill as a starting quarterback. First of all, he hasn't played quarterback full time since BYU. Even then, he was often injured. He's got obviously a great arm, measurables. Can he read a defense? Okay, what happens when again, defensive coordinators get an opportunity to get film on him and start to take away some of his strengths? Where again, we saw him again mature a little bit under fire through the preseason, where he was willing to stay in the pocket, hang in there and throw the football. We saw that a little bit as a slash roll last year coming in for Breeze. We're hearing he's going to throw the ball a little bit more this season in that slash roll. We'll see how that works out. I am truly not convinced still that he is the heir apparent. I think he will get an opportunity to compete, but I don't know if ultimately he's the starter for the New Orleans Saints once Drew Brees hangs it up.
No, I don't either, because he hasn't thrown that many passes in the NFL.
And can he read a defense?
Right. Can he read a defense? And is he 29, I believe? He's a little
I think
older.
30, yeah.
30, a little older than you would expect given his limited experience at quarterback, partly because of the unique situation at BYU.
Yes.
So, no, I'm not convinced, and I don't think if you get Sean Payton, to
put him on
tell
lie
you,
detector, right?
Yeah, put him on the lie detector. I think he would say, no, I'm not 100% sure he's going to be the successor, but I think he does see the potential there, and that's why he says he's earned the opportunity to compete, because I don't think even Payton knows until he's able to see more of him in a quarterback role over a period of time beyond what he's been able to see so far.
Right. I think the happiest player on the roster when he got that money was Alvin Kamara. Because Alvin Kamara is also in a slash role when you look at it. Playing, again, wide receiver in a lot of cases, playing running back, used as a decoy. If you need him in a pinch, he can return kicks and punts for you. He is the ultimate slash player outside of Taysom Hill. And again, if you're valuing Taysom Hill, at $21 million, with $16 million guaranteed over 2 years, what is Alvin Kamara's value to this team?
Well, yeah, and then that's without even getting into a Christian McCaffrey, a very similar player, came in the same year, got at Carolina. So, yeah, Alvin Kamara, who's normally a very happy guy, is, I'm sure, even happier these days.
Got to be ecstatic, right? Everything's flowing his way right now when it comes to contracts, setting the bar for where he will be.
Sure. Now, we'll see what happens this year, because last year, in the running game, he was not as effective as he was the first 2 years. He was hurt for part of the season. But late in the season, Payton said injury was not a factor. And he still wasn't as productive as we've seen in the past. So if he's going to get a huge contract, now maybe they sign him to one before the season starts. That's what they would like to do.
Sure.
But the Saints may want to see, or if they can't come to terms, we'll all see how he produces this year, coming off a season that was very good last year, but not quite as good as the first two.
Right. Well, something's going to have to happen, because you only have one franchise tag, and you got him and Demario Davis's contracts ending at the same time. So again, they're not letting Demario Davis get out the door, and they'd rather not let obviously Alvin Kamara get out the door. So it'll be interesting to see again how that plays out. That leads me back to Larry Woolford. At a $12.8 million cap hit. Okay, but yet, if you cut him, there's $8 million of freed up money right there that would look nice on a paycheck for either Demario Davis or Alvin Kamara. I'm not saying it's the whole paycheck, but I'm saying it's a good start.
Right. There's no question that the possible freeing up of money by releasing Woolford is a factor in how they handle Kamara and Davis.
Yes.
Now, there are a lot of ways it could play out, but certainly that's one chip they have that they can play if they choose it. That's the best way to go.
That leads us to Jameis Winston. He signs a one-year contract with the New Orleans Saints. It is a base value of $1.1 million. He got a $148,000 signing bonus. There's about $3.45 million in incentives. You're talking about a guy that's thrown for over almost 20,000 yards. He has 121 touchdowns. He's got a 61.3 completion percentage in the NFL. He's had 28 wins as a Tampa Bay quarterback in 78 starts. The big problem, obviously, is the 88 interceptions, and I don't even have the fumbles down here as one of obviously the negatives against him. You got a chance to speak to him yesterday. First of all, I'll go on the record of saying, first of all, let me give a shout out to our colleague Ed Daniels, who almost a week and a half, 2 weeks ago on his TV show mentioned Jameis Winston as a possibility of coming in here. When nobody was talking about Jameis Winston coming to New Orleans, he mentioned it. Kudos to Ed on that call. But with that said, I think it is a great move for the Saints and a great move for Jameis Winston. Give me your thoughts. You had a chance to speak to him the other day. What is your feeling on him coming here? And also, again, one thing that I took from the conversation, very humble. Humbled by what has happened in Tampa Bay.
First of all, I agree completely that it's a great move for both sides because this year gives them a feeling out process for him to decide whether he sees himself as possibly the successor to Drew Brees in a year or two, whenever that time comes, or is he able to do like Teddy Bridgewater and perhaps rehabilitate himself enough to be able to get a better opportunity elsewhere next year.
Sure.
The Saints get a chance to have a veteran backup for this year in case Brees gets hurt, and also to take a look at him as possibly the long-term successor without investing a lot of money in him. He gets nice incentives in case he does get a chance to play. So it works out great for both sides. I was very struck by him on the conference call yesterday. I'm sure the Saints gave him some guidance. I'm sure his agent gave him some guidance, and he said all the right things.
Yes, he did.
But he didn't come across as a guy who was coached. He came across as sincere. Genuine. And humble is a good word. He even used that at some point in talking about not being re-signed by Tampa Bay, the only team he had ever known. But I think the fact that he came to New Orleans for a relatively small amount of money, recognizing the opportunity to work with Drew Brees, to work with Sean Payton. You know, another thing that struck me is he had done his homework because he said, you know, I'm looking forward to working with Drew Brees and Coach Payton and Coach Carmichael and Coach Lombardi and Coach Mitchell, and he went down the entire coaching staff on the offense. And Joe Lombardi is going to be a big part of this because he's in the quarterback's room. Sean Payton's not in the quarterback's room that much. So he gets overlooked sometimes, but he'll be a big part of this as well. But Winston recognized all of the coaches on the staff that he would be working with. And then he even said, this gets back to the humility, is he said he's going to take whatever he can from that room, which Bridgewater told him was going to be a joy to be a part of. And he said that he's looking forward to what he can learn from Drew Brees and from Taysom Hill and from Tommy Stevens. Now, here's a kid who just got picked in the 7th round who was not a starter for his whole senior year in college, but he's saying maybe I can learn something from him. So, you know, I thought that was a surprising degree of humility that he showed there. But the whole thing was, he's at a turning point in his life. He just got married. He has a 1-year-old son. He's been vilified by fans and media alike, sometimes warranted, probably not always warranted, at least from a football standpoint. And he recognizes that he has an opportunity to kind of hit the reset button, learn from the best in the business with Brees and Peyton and the other coaches that I mentioned. And so I think he recognizes that. He even said this, it's not about the money, it's not about my ego, it's about the opportunity I've been given here to learn how to be a better quarterback and a better professional. And he said, I want to serve Drew Brees, I want to serve Sean Payton. He used the word serve about 5 times. So all of that was very impressive. He had his knee scoped. He's lost weight. He's gotten much more conscious of nutrition. He had LASIK surgery on his eyes.
He's eating vegan now, from what we understand.
Except on Saturdays. He says he cheats and has chicken on Saturdays. But yeah, so it's just all of these things are coming together at this crossroads in his life. Now, he's made a lot of mistakes in his 26 years. So we'll see if he's ready to take advantage of that. But he seems to have a very clear understanding of the opportunity that he has here, and he seems like he's grounded enough to take advantage of that over this next season, and then we'll see where that leads. It could lead to a long feature in New Orleans, or it could lead to a real good situation somewhere else.
I 100% agree with everything you said, and I'll add this. First of all, the guy makes all the throws. Okay, we've watched him, again, if you're a fan of the New Orleans Saints, if you've covered the Saints, again, he's a guy that's tough as nails. He'll hang in to the last possible second. It's probably, again, why you look at those interceptions, again, trying to fit the ball in, maybe trusting his arm too much. Decision-making, he'll learn a lot from Breeze from that. Preparation, he'll learn a lot from Breeze there. Obviously, he's trying to take care of his body. A lot of fans here in New Orleans upset about the W way back when, or again the altercation between Mike Evans himself and Marshawn Lattimore. I said this on the radio show the last few days. If Mike Evans said he was coming to New Orleans tomorrow, would you say no because him and Marshawn Lattimore got into it? Of course you wouldn't. You say, come on in, Mike. Sure. We want you. We need you. As far as off the field, and I'm not making an excuse for him, but you're talking about a college kid into a guy that was in his early 20s. Again, there's a lot of people that have made mistakes in their lives, again, as young adults, okay, that don't get the spotlight of a quarterback or, again, a guy in the NFL. I'm not excusing what he's done, okay? There's no excuse for it. But people should have an opportunity to get a second chance and to be able to grow from it. And again, he looks like he's turned his life around. So why not give him another opportunity? And for the Saints, if this guy works out, I believe he's your next starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints.
I think there's a very good chance of that because there's a real good chance this is going to be Drew Brees' last season, even though Sean Payton misspoke on ESPN. That's still a very real possibility.
I agree.
And this is psychologically and intellectually a great opportunity for him. I think this is great for him if he doesn't play. Just stand back for a year, absorb everything you can from Drew Brees. Just watching him in the meeting rooms, watching him in practice, watching him in training camp, watching from the sidelines during games. So I think he can come back in 2021, even if he doesn't throw a pass this year, and be in a much better position to excel as an NFL quarterback in 2 years rather than this coming season. And he's done a lot of good stuff up to this point, even though he's done some bad stuff as well.
No doubt about it. Let's grab a call before, and I want to get to the LSU Tigers and the Tulane Green Wave. Toby is in Gretna. Toby, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Toby.
Hey, Eric. How you doing?
Doing good.
Yeah, can you comment on the undrafted free agents? And thank you.
All right. We talked about not having a lot of openings for the draft picks. It may be even more difficult for undrafted free agents. Although again, the Saints were very feverishly working on trying to be able to get the free agents they felt that were not going to be drafted and get ahead of the game for. And look, they've guaranteed a few of those guys some decent money.
Yeah, and Mickey Loomis said before the draft that the UDFAs was going to be one of the trickier things because of the circumstances.
Sure.
Because you have scouts and the head coach and the GM and the assistant GM working on contracts and position coaches, and they're all trying to discuss what are our priorities because you can only sign so many. So that was going to be a tricky part. And, and they've done a pretty good job in recent years of hitting on somebody there. Deonte Harris jumped out last year because of the statistics that he had at a small school. I don't know that anybody jumps off the page like he did last year, but I'll throw one out there because you brought it up earlier about the offensive line. Maybe Adrian McGee from LSU is a guy who's a sleeper, perhaps only his practice squad and not necessarily active roster, but a guy who played a lot of football at LSU, played well, is versatile. I don't know that his ceiling is all that high in the NFL, but I think in terms of finding a way onto the practice roster as a rookie because of his versatility and experience and coming from a really good program, he might be a guy who has a chance.
Let's talk about LSU. Again, record-breaking for LSU. I talked about last week. I gave all the reasons why they'd pick LSU players, and I was dead wrong. I talked about McMahon. I talked about Bill Johnson. I talked about Bobby April. I talked about Coach O and all these relationships. And of course, the positions of need didn't work out. LSU had 14 players drafted, 5 in the first round. They tie Ohio State for the most in drafted players in NFL history with 14. They just missed the record with Miami, who had 6 first rounders in 2004. They have 5. An incredible draft. And then not just that, 6 other players were signed as undrafted free agents, a total of 20 players off that LSU squad that won the national championship.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, but that tells you how that they went 15-0 and won the national championship and in fairly dominant fashion overall. Joe Burrow sucked all of the oxygen out of this season, and rightfully so. Yes. Probably the best season any college football player has ever had in the history of the sport. And so it was hard to appreciate all of the good players that were around him. Certainly Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, who's not in the draft, he's coming back. All of those guys got some attention. But, some of the other guys, especially on defense, didn't necessarily get as much attention as they might have if the quarterback weren't so dominant. So it's good to see them get recognized. The flip side of that is these guys are all very good, deserving of where they got picked, and hopefully they're all very successful. But this happens every year. You see it with Alabama more than anybody else. You've seen it a little bit with Clemson of late, Ohio State, is because of the program. When teams are looking at a bullpen of 2, 3, 4 players, take the Alabama guy, take the Clemson guy. And this year I think there was a lot of it, boy, they're all about even take the LSU guy.
Yes.
And so I think some of them probably benefited from that, and rightfully so.
True.
So we'll see. They got a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, and it was earned by the success of the program.
Tulane, Darryl Mooney goes in the 5th round to Chicago. Thaddeus Keys goes in the 7th round in Kansas City. Jalen McCleskey, J.J. McCleskey's son, goes to Atlanta, an undrafted free agent. Bradwell, the running back, to the Chargers. And Montano, the center, to Pittsburgh, undrafted free agents. A nice haul for Tulane as well. And really for the entire state, I just don't have the time to go through every single player that is an undrafted free agent or drafted. But this was a nice crop of players out of the state of Louisiana.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And it's been a while since I think Tulane's had that many players. And, Bradwell just struck me when you mentioned him there, because San Diego, I think, has some room for running backs on that roster. So we'll see if maybe he's able to sneak onto the roster or the practice roster there. But, once again, not a lot of success around the state for teams last year compared to some others outside of LSU. But certainly you can see that there was an awful lot of talent.
Right. No doubt about it. Les, but before I let you go, I've got about 30 seconds. Major League Baseball, do they play this year?
No.
How about finishing the NBA season?
No.
Is college football and professional football, will they start on time, or will they move that back?
We don't have time to get into important differences between the two. I think the whole rest of the calendar is going to be dictated by what the NFL does. And I think they have the best chance of having some semblance of a regular season.
Les, always appreciate the time, my friend. That's award-winning journalist Les East of CrescentCitySports.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. There's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE-TV at 10 p.m. You can catch us on Friday nights, 9 o'clock, Pelican Sports Television. And, of course, you can catch me on the radio, Sports 1280, 101.1 FM HD2, and the iHeart Radio app. That is noon to 2 weekdays. You can listen live, download the podcast at ericasher.com. Every single episode of Inside New Orleans Sports can be seen at ericasher.com. We also post this show on our social media platforms as well, or you go to WLAET YouTube channel and catch all of the shows. Special thanks again to our underwriters who make this show possible. Also to our to Les East for joining us tonight, and also the WLE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Naila Jones, Alex Chacon, and my director, William Hill. I'm Eric Asher. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.